When I had first heard they were dating, I thought it was a joke. Mom had been the one to tell me. We had been on the phone for nearly 40 minutes whilst I roamed up and down my small bedroom packing away my things into a suitcase. My 3 years at university studying animation and computer design were over. I was set to be picked up by Mom the following morning. "Oh," said Mom, "your sister has a new boyfriend." This wasn't particularly hot news. Lee had lots of boyfriends all throughout secondary school. "You remember Toby, don't you?" Mom said. "No," I said honestly. It had been years since I had last seen him, and I hadn't thought about what had happened on my 16th birthday. Perhaps it was harder to remember Toby because I hadn't told anyone about what I had caught him doing that day. "Toby Pickford?" I said. "Yeah," said Mom. "Toby who was at my birthday party years back?" I said. "Yes," said Mom. "Don't you remember inviting him?" I did remember. Toby was a year younger than me, and I had known him back when I was a member of the Maywell Scouts. Back then, I had seen a lot of Toby, but had never gotten to know him much on a personal level. He had been energetic, but also shy, very introverted. I could vividly remember all us little scouts dressed in our gray uniforms with the red scarves around our necks. One of the scout leaders would fill up plastic cups with diluted orange juice, and then we would each receive a biscuit. Toby liked to dip his biscuit into the juice. It was those memories of knowing Toby from Scouts which had prompted me to invite him to my 16th birthday party. A handful of my close friends were going, as well as some relatives. Although it was my 16th, I wasn't interested in making it into something big. I had been on my way home from school walking down Hallworth Road when I spotted Toby waiting for the bus. He looked lonely, standing on his own, not talking with anyone. Whenever I saw him in school, he was always alone, or at the fringe of groups. Anyone could tell he was very shy, and the type that had difficulty making friends. I had stopped to get myself a bag of chips from the nearby chip shop. Without thinking too much about it, I had gone over to Toby and started a conversation with him. "Chip?" I had said to him. He looked at me as if very confused for a second, and then he accepted the chip. "How have you been?" I said. "Remember when we were in Scouts together?" "Yeah," said Toby, tentatively smiling whilst he chewed the chip and then picked another from the bag. "You know," he said, "I saw your drawing in the art building, the drawing of the samurai. It's amazing." "Thanks, man," I said. I was used to compliments over my drawings. I loved drawing manga-style art specifically, and found I had a talent for it. At 15 years of age, I could draw almost to the same technical level as the professional mangaka I admired. "I've started to draw manga myself," said Toby. Unprompted, though I didn't mind, Toby took off his rucksack, which looked big on him because he was quite small, even compared to me, and opened up a drawing pad. Toby's art was mediocre but showed promise. There were still plenty of circles with the usual crisscross lines drawn around them, in an effort to create the head of the character he had drawn. The drawings. I had forgotten what Lee had mentioned to me once. She was in one of his classes once. She had sat behind him. Over the course of several weeks, Toby had seen to drawing pictures of Lee in a manga style. He showed them to her, and she politely acknowledged the drawings. Months later, Lee had made a Facebook post in which she made it clear she thought Toby was a pervert. The post itself was a picture of all different types of stick figure people. Each one showed a stick figure doing something like reading or swimming or singing and so on. The idea was to tag your friends so they could be delighted by being tagged as the smart one, or the best friend. Lee had tagged Toby as the pervert. "Toby's a pervert? Really?" one of Lee's friends had posted. "Yeah," Lee had replied, but didn't elaborate. I had seen the post on Facebook and had asked Lee about why she thought Toby was a pervert, and she explained about the drawings. I had asked her if there was anything particularly perverted about the drawings themselves, and she said she just thought it was weird that he thought it was okay to draw her during class each week. If I had known this about Toby at the time, plus all the other odd but harmless-seeming things he had gotten up to in and outside of school, then I might have rethought inviting him to my birthday party. Toby looked at me with awe and bewilderment when I mentioned about my birthday party that was happening the next day, Saturday. and that he was welcome to come by if he wanted to. "Sure," he said eagerly. He then got on the bus and went home. The next day on my birthday, he turned up early and sat on the sofa whilst I opened my presents. Lee was there and had been shocked to see Toby was in our home. "What's he doing here?" she said to me when we were alone in the kitchen after I was done opening my presents. "Who? Toby?" I said. "Yeah," said Lee. "He's so weird." "Nah," I said. "He's just shy." Lee rolled her eyes. Lee was the complete opposite to Toby in a lot of ways. Naturally very pretty, outgoing queen bee of her friendship group. I returned to the party and spent a few hours hanging out with my friends. We shared a 6-pack of beers out in the back garden whilst my parents and other relatives stayed in the living room. Lee stayed with Mom and Dad in the living room because, although she didn't dislike my friends, they were all a bunch of weebs like myself, and she just didn't have any common interests to talk to them about. It was around 5 p.m. when I noticed I hadn't seen Toby in a while. He was easy to overlook, so I glanced around the back garden and through what I could see in the house, but I couldn't spot him. Casually, I got up and decided to see how he was doing. I ventured through the house to the living room. He wasn't among my relatives either. Maybe he was using the bathroom? I waited around for 10 minutes chatting with my relatives and then decided it had been long enough to go upstairs to check on Toby. I didn't know if he actually was upstairs. For all I knew, he might have gone home without telling anyone. I walked down the hall, and for a moment I wondered if he was doing something creepy in my sister's room. I walked casually to the first room on the first floor of the house, my sister's room. I peered inside and found the room was empty. Had I really expected to find Toby in there doing something weird? I had probably just let Lee's misguided opinion about Toby play in my mind too much. Josh had mentioned he wanted to borrow a CD of mine, an Iron Maiden album, so I decided to go grab it since I had come all the way upstairs and would likely forget if I didn't grab it there and then. I went into my room, whistling to myself, and that's when I caught Toby in the act. He was kneeling next to my underwear drawer and had one of my socks in his hand pressed against his nose. He was taking a big sniff of my socks. His other hand rested on the open drawer. Toby opened his eyes and looked at me in horror. He dropped the sock, stood up, and went almost as red as a tomato. "What are you doing?" I said. My words were tinged with bewilderment as well as anger. "I'm sorry," Toby said. I could see he was utterly mortified by what I had caught him doing. "I wasn't," he began, as if attempting to explain why he had been taking a big old sniff of my sock. He seemed to give up before he could try for an explanation. He rushed out of the room like a frightened mouse. Strangely, he didn't leave my house for another hour. He stayed whilst everyone sang happy birthday. I tried to pretend like he wasn't there. After the cake was cut and everyone was handed their slice on a paper plate, I noticed Toby slipping out the front door. I had seen him more or less every day at school here and there after that incident. I had even spoken to him a few times. He had tried to show me more of his drawings, but I kept the conversations with him short and didn't stick around to give him hope of us hanging out again. I had been tempted to tell at least one person about what I had caught Toby doing in my room, but somehow I just never got round to it. In a way, I felt bad for Toby, who was already getting tagged in Facebook posts for being a pervert. Me spreading a truthful rumor about him sniffing my socks would be the final nail in the coffin to any kind of social life he had. What's more, I didn't much like the idea of being associated forever as the guy who had his socks sniffed. I hadn't been close friends with him before, so it wasn't a big deal pretending like he didn't exist after the incident. "Could you send me a picture?" I asked Mom while still on the phone. She had to go, but she sent me the requested pic a few minutes later. The picture showed Lee sat beside Toby on the sofa. They were holding hands, but had a hand's width of distance between them. Lee had her usual duck-face-style pose on for the photo, and Toby smiled sheepishly. The thing was, Toby hadn't undergone a major transformation. He was just older, taller, still had his baby face, and the same shy demeanor. The more I tried to picture Lee and Toby as an item, the more confused I felt. It was only the pure logic that I might not be able to understand what made their budding relationship work. or at the very least have potential, that prevented me from taking any kind of action, like calling up Lee and asking her what the heck she was thinking dating Toby of all people. Mom arrived at 11 a.m. to pick me up. As her little white car eased to a stop, I noticed Lee was sitting in the passenger seat. She was smiling and waving at me as I neared the car with my luggage. Mom got out of the car and helped me pack my stuff into the boot, and the remainder, things like pillows and the duvet, onto the back seat. When we were done, I gave one last look to the house I had stayed with my flatmates for 2 years. The first had been spent in a campus dorm room, and then we drove off. I sat in the back seat among all the stuff I was bringing home with me, whilst Lee, ever the thoughtful sister, remained sat where she was in the passenger seat. I noticed she was dressed in a top that was more revealing than usual. Didn't Mom care Lee was dressing like this? I told myself that Lee was just making a particularly bad fashion choice, and to maybe bring it up with her later in a way that wasn't going to feel too confrontational. I managed all of 5 minutes after we set off before asking Lee about Toby. "Are you both really together?" I said. Lee shot Mom a look. "You told him?" said Lee. "It just kind of happened," she said. "He's actually really kind of okay." "Okay," I said. "So how did you even start talking?" "I'm not talking about this right now," said Lee. "I mean, I'm sure he's a nice guy," I said, trying to be diplomatic. "But, oh, I know he's a total weirdo," said Lee. "I know, but he's also kind of cute, okay?" "So this isn't some kind of prank," I said. "You're really dating Toby Pickford?" "Yes," said Lee, getting annoyed. "What's your problem?" "No problem," I said. I didn't say any more on the matter for the rest of the hour car journey back home. That sense of dread I had eased up and completely went away by the time we reached the front door. I busied myself taking all of the things to my bedroom. Mom helped. She wouldn't leave me until she saw everything was unpacked. I ate dinner with Mom, Dad, and Lee, and everything seemed fine. I avoided mentioning Toby again, but it was Mom who brought him up. "When are you seeing Toby next?" said Mom. Probably tomorrow. Is it okay if he comes over?" said Lee. "Of course," said Mom. "Just remember to keep your door open. Keep the lights on. You know the rules when boys are in the house." "Okay," said Lee, and she took her dirty plate into the kitchen with her. When I entered the kitchen, I saw Lee was standing at the sink staring out of the window. It was dark out, so the window was no more than a black veil. The soapy water in the sink had reached its limit and had started to overflow, spilling onto the tiled floor. "Lee," I said to get her attention. She continued to stare at the window, remaining very still. "Lee?" I said again, louder the second time. She snapped out of her reverie and gave a "EP" of surprise at the overflowing water. She turned the tap off and shoved her hand down the sink, pulling the plug and letting most of the water drain. She then saw to mop up the water that had spilled on the floor. "What's going on with you?" I said to Lee when the mess was cleared up. "Nothing," she said. "I was just thinking." "About what?" I said. "You've been acting really weird," she said. "I've been acting weird?" I said. "Don't you remember what you used to think about?" Lee raised her hand and said, "Hey, he's my boyfriend now. Can you stop trying to make a problem for us?" "I'm sorry," I said. I didn't know what more to say. I could tell if I pushed the issue any harder it would upset Lee even more. It started to settle in that she might, somehow, for some strange reason unbeknownst to me, actually have feelings for sock-sniffing Toby. I said, "I'm sorry," a second time, and then gave Lee a big hug. I went upstairs soon after and went to bed. The following morning I woke up to the sound of Lee giggling downstairs. I made my way down to the dining room. Then I saw him, Toby, sat beside Lee at the dinner table. The immediate vibe I got from both of them sitting together was that they were genuinely enjoying each other's company. My brain had to adjust to seeing the older, slightly bigger and broader, but still mostly baby-faced and altogether average, Toby that was before me. "Hey," he said, looking in my direction for a moment very casually, and then fixing his attention back to Lee. She was wearing the same tank top as yesterday and was sitting leaning against Toby. Toby had a look on his face, a kind of amazed wonder, as if he were even more surprised than me at the kind of treatment he was receiving from my sister. Toby drew himself back. "We shouldn't," he said. "We need to behave." "Oh, fine," said Lee, and she sat back in her seat. I didn't see much of either of them for the rest of the day. They stayed in Lee's room with the door open. I came and went from my bedroom to downstairs and back several times for different reasons, but most of all to keep an eye on what they were up to. Toby seemed awkward and sat on her bed. Lee moved around a lot, doing most of the talking. By this point, I'd had enough of trying to guess what was going on. Whatever it was didn't seem like that big a deal, so I went to my room and spent the day relaxing, reading manga, and doing some drawing. After drawing for an hour listening to music, I decided to go make myself a cup of tea. It was as I made my way down the hall towards the stairs that I heard Lee and Toby having a heated discussion. "You're going to keep your mouth shut," said Lee, whispering what she was saying. "I'm not going to have you ruining this for me. Do you understand?" "Okay," said Toby meekly. "But what if they find out?" "They won't," said Lee. "Not if you act normal. The only problem here is you, so just be cool and I'll let you stay around. I don't have to be nice to you like this. You know that, right?" "Yeah," said Toby. "I'm sorry." "It's fine," said Lee. "Just do as I say from now on, okay?" Toby must have nodded that he was going to continue to do whatever it was Lee was asking him to do. It was strange hearing Lee speaking so intensely to Toby of all people. What exactly was she asking him to do? To not act strange, or was there something else going on that demanded Toby swear himself to secrecy? I retraced my steps back to my bedroom door and closed the door hard. Toby stayed until 10 p.m. Lee had taken a shower and had just stepped out of the bathroom into the hallway when I stood in her way. "Hey," I said. "Can we talk?" Lee nodded, hugging the towel around her tighter. "I heard what you said to Toby earlier," I said. Lee's eyes went wide as if I had just stabbed her in the stomach. "You did?" she said. I realized then that she thought I already knew what she and Toby were up to, what they were trying to keep a secret. I hadn't planned to do so, but I continued to talk to her as if their secret was known to me. "Why, Lee?" I said. "Just tell me why?" "I didn't intend for it to happen," she said. "It just did. I'm trying to make the best out of the situation." A renewed sense of dread was taking hold of me. What was it that she and Toby were hiding that had her so distressed? I was close to finding out what it was. "What does Toby have to do with this?" I said. Lee's concerned expression changed, becoming stoic. "Nothing," she said. "Leave him out of this." Lee started to move away, but I grabbed her shoulder. "Ow," she whimpered. "You're hurting me." "I'll let you go if you tell me what's going on right now." Lee's eyes widened, and I could see how frightened she was. She put a hand to my cheek and forced a smile. "Everything is going to be okay," she said. "Trust me." "How can I trust you if you don't tell me what you're hiding?" Lee's lips firmed up. "There's nothing you or I or anyone else can do about this. It's better you don't know. Now please let me go." I didn't let go. I couldn't. I felt like grabbing her by the shoulders and shaking her until she told me everything. I felt like a monster even holding her arm as tight as I was, but it was all I could do. It was a weak threat I hoped she didn't see through. "Let me go or I'll scream," she said. I didn't let go, and then Lee sucked in a big breath. I slapped my hand over her mouth and her eyes went wide. I felt her tongue tickle my palm and I let go of her mouth and her arm. Lee giggled and pranced back to her bedroom. Enough was enough. I had to talk to Mom and Dad about what was going on. If I couldn't get through to Lee, then maybe they could. I went downstairs and told Mom and Dad about all of my concerns, and I also told them about Toby sniffing my socks in my room on my birthday. Mom and Dad listened attentively and quickly shared the same level of concern as me. Dad shot up from the sofa. "What are you doing?" said Mom, standing up and hurrying to Dad's side. grabbing his wrist gently to stop him from thundering upstairs. "I'm going to find out what she's up to," said Dad. "None of this sounds right." I know, said Mom. "That boy clearly isn't good for her. But don't go up there shouting and demanding things. Please let me talk to her first, okay?" Dad looked to the stairs for a few moments before relaxing a little. "Okay," he said. "Talk to her tonight. If she starts messing you around, then I'll step in." I went to bed that night unable to sleep. At around 4 in the morning, I noticed a light coming from downstairs. I got up and crept my way to the stairs and made my way down as silently as possible, doing my best to avoid the steps I knew creaked. I spotted Mom and Lee sitting at the dinner table. They were whispering very quietly. "Maybe Dad will get through to you," Mom said, sounding as if she were at the end of her patience. "Don't," said Lee, whining. "There's nothing going on. I swear." "Stop lying to me," said Mom. "You think I can't tell how different you've been acting? It's Toby, isn't it? He's blackmailing you, isn't he?" "No," said Lee, whining even more on the verge of tears. "He isn't." "Then tell me," said Mom. "Tell me everything right now, or else I'll let Dad handle things his way." Lee shot up suddenly and slapped Mom's phone off the table. "Bitch," she said, and then Lee ran towards the stairs. She froze when she reached the first step, spotting me. She then renewed her effort to climb the stairs, passing me by. She hurried to her bedroom and shut the door behind her. Mom picked up her phone, placed it on the table, and then started to weep into her hands. I made my way down to her and gave Mom a hug. She was surprised to see me, but simply held me close. "I tried," she said. "She's not listening. Dad will have to sort her out." I stayed with Mom for another 10 minutes, and then we both went up to bed. I hated how things seemed to be getting worse, how Lee was passing by every opportunity to explain her situation so we could help. I thought World War III would start when Mom gave Dad the all-clear to go nuclear on Lee after last night. But nothing happened. Mom made breakfast and Lee stayed in her room and Dad went to work as usual. I wasn't eager to set off any dramas myself, more than I already had at least, so I decided to make plans to see my friends instead. I spent the whole day catching up with my friends who I had only seen here and there on visits back home from university. I didn't mention anything of what had been going on to them, but word of Lee dating Toby had gotten around. My friends were just as perplexed, and a little repulsed, at the idea of Toby and Lee being an item as I had been. I returned home just after dinner time and found Mom and Dad and Lee sat in the living room. Things felt far from normal because there was some tension in the air, but there wasn't any arguing or tears like I expected. After making some small talk with Mom and Dad, Lee just sat and watched TV with her closed fist resting against her temple. I took an opportunity to speak with Mom alone in the kitchen. "Did you tell Dad to step in?" I said. "No," said Mom. "I spoke with Lee some more about things, and there's nothing going on after all. She's just being a bratty teen." "Wait, what?" I said, confused. "She's clearly up to something with Toby. I heard them. I pretty much got a confession about it from her. I just don't know exactly what it is she's up to." Mom looked impatient all of a sudden. "She's in love," she said, "and you're being a protective big brother. I'm so proud of you for caring so much about your sister, but there's nothing the matter." I couldn't keep the disbelief from my face. Last night I had been so sure Mom was going to bring Dad into this, but now she was acting as if everything was okay. What had she found out from Lee to make her change her mind to this degree? "Mom, is it blackmail?" I said. "Does Toby have something over Lee?" "That's enough," said Mom crossly, pointing a finger at me. "I'm telling you as your mother to drop this right now. No more. Do you hear me?" None of this made sense. None of it. I didn't know what to say or do, so I simply nodded. "Good boy," said Mom, and she cupped her hand to my cheek and caressed it, and then she embraced me in a hug. I felt numb and angry, and I knew I had only one option left, to tell Dad about my concerns. But with Mom changing her tune on Lee and Toby, I no longer felt as sure of myself that something was wrong. What if it was all in my mind and there really was no problem? What if I was the problem? It was a horrible feeling to not be able to trust my own intuition anymore. Lee went out to see Toby, which gave Dad an opportunity to check in with Mom regarding everything that had been discussed yesterday. I stood in the dining room listening into Mom and Dad's conversation in the living room. Mom repeatedly said the same things she had said to me earlier to assuage any concerns my dad had. "Nothing's the matter," she said. "In fact, I think Mike is the one stirring trouble." Mom's words were like a slap to the face. "Really?" said Dad. "Do you really believe that story Mike told us about Toby sniffing his socks?" said Mom derisively. "He's just jealous that another boy has taken up his little sister's attention." I clenched my fists and wondered for a moment if I was about to storm into the living room and yell at Mom. I decided against it, realizing there was nothing I could say against someone gaslighting me so much, my own mother no less. "I should probably speak with Lee just in case," said Dad. "If you like," said Mom, "but it's all a worry over nothing." Things went quiet, and then I heard the sound of kissing. "What's gotten into you?" said Dad, unused to Mom's sudden assertiveness. Mom didn't say anything, and the sound of kissing resumed. I walked off to the kitchen and went out to the back garden for some fresh air and to get away from the sounds of what my parents were doing. I left a half hour later to hang out with my friends. I wanted to tell them everything that was happening at home, but I couldn't bring myself to do it for fear that I was the one making everything up in my head. I was sure something was wrong. Things just weren't adding up. But there was always the awful possibility I was wrong about it all. Over the next few days, the previous drama involving Mom and Lee was as if they never happened at all. Lee stopped bringing Toby over and went out to see him instead. Mom and Dad continued on with things as usual. On the Sunday morning, I had been passing by Mom and Dad's bedroom, and I could hear them talking in bed. Unexpectedly, I noticed the conversation was getting heated. "Nothing is wrong," said Mom. "Why won't you let things be?" "Stop lying to me," said Dad. "I can tell something is off. Mike can too. I've kept my concerns to myself, but you can't keep covering up for Lee. What are you two up to?" "Nothing," said Mom. "Please, you're scaring me." There was the sound of kissing, but it stopped quickly. "Get off me," said Dad. "You've been like a rabbit in heat all week. I'm exhausted with it." "You love it," said Mom. "Come here." I heard the slap from Dad, which followed. "Don't touch me again," said Dad. "I mean it." I felt a strong urge to race to Mom's defense. Whatever was going on, she didn't deserve to be slapped by Dad like that. I stopped myself, however, because a part of me was relieved that Dad wasn't going to let Mom bury our concerns under the rug any longer. Not only was Lee acting strange, but so was Mom. I listened for a while longer, but the talk had stopped. Dad got up and took a shower. Mom wasn't making a sound. I was strangely excited to speak with Dad, whilst I waited for him to come downstairs after his shower. Together, we would be able to get to the bottom of things. Mom came downstairs first. She had a redness on her cheek from where Dad had slapped her. "I fell," said Mom, spotting my concerned look. Silly me. Dad came downstairs, and strangely, he was whistling. "Morning," he said, and he slapped Mom on the behind and then pulled up a seat at the dinner table. "Breakfast," he said. "Get to it." Mom fixed him with a dirty look. He met her look with a casual one of his own and smiled. Then Mom began to smile as if genuinely amused. "Fine," she said, "coming right up." What? I thought. Nothing they were saying or doing made any sense. "Did you speak with Mom about Lee?" I said. "Oh yeah," said Dad. "It's all fine. Just girls being girls." The knot that was in my stomach felt like it became several times tighter all of a sudden. I wanted to cry. Dad was fixing me with a look that was far too casual for what was going on. He had hit Mom, something he had never done as far as I knew, and he had come downstairs whistling, and then he had told her to make breakfast like an order. That simply wasn't the kind of man Dad was. "So that's it, Dad?" I said. "You've changed your mind too?" Dad looked at me as if confused. "Everything's fine," he said. He reached forward and ruffled my hair as I were half my age. "You're overthinking things." Dad sat back and started to drum his fingers on the table. "How about you drop this behavior from now on, okay?" said Dad. "Fretting over nothing is only going to make things worse. You don't want things to get worse, do you?" "No," I said. Dad nodded. "Good," he said. "Everything is taken care of. Just enjoy the free time you have right now. You'll have to start the job search soon, won't you?" I nodded. I was talking to my dad, but I wasn't at the same time. He was talking to me and I had to listen. It was the same feeling I got from Lee and Mum. I was being spoken to and nothing I said was going to make them admit to what was going on. I tried my absolute best to pretend like nothing was amiss. Toby started coming over every day, and Mum and Dad stopped having a problem with it. I kept an ear out for any more hushed conversations. I wasn't sure if they stopped, or if they were simply able to talk about whatever they were hiding without me catching on to it. 3 weeks passed, and the sense of everything feeling off didn't go away. Over and over again, I tried to convince myself that it was all in my imagination, only to catch a strange look from Mum, or Dad, or Lee. Mum and Lee had been talking about going shopping, and I had listened whilst I sat back and watched TV on the adjacent sofa. I had glanced over at them talking, and had caught them both looking at me in such a way that I was sure their entire conversation had been a kind of act. This got so bad I was painfully aware at all times that Mum, Dad, and Lee were always acting as if everything were fine, and were always checking from the corners of their eyes to see if I was buying into it. I didn't know what to do. It was easy enough to go with the flow and have conversations with any of them. I tried to pretend like everything was okay. For all I knew, I was becoming mentally ill, or already was, and that they really were doing their best to appease me, as if I were really the one causing the feeling of disharmony in the household. My friends noticed how stressed I had become, but I decided not to continue seeing them for a while because I was sure if I did, I would tell them about my concerns. I simply was too afraid to tell anyone else about what was going on for fear that they would also act concerned initially, only to turn about and act as if all my concerns were just my imagination. I dodged concerned texts from my friends with messages explaining I was working hard on finding my first big job after uni and couldn't spare the time to hang out with them. One thing kept occurring more and more. Mum, Dad, and Lee mentioned Toby in some way in pretty much every conversation they had around me. "Toby would love to watch you draw sometime," Mum had said. "Toby and Lee were thinking of going for a walk round the lake. "Want to come?" Dad had said. "Toby was wondering if you would like to hang out and play a video game or something sometime," Lee had said. I had said no to all of these things and many others. It was obvious I didn't want to spend a single second around Toby, not with all this going on, and I couldn't understand why they wanted me to hang out with him so much. What was so special about him? The constant stress of dealing with my family's strange behavior wore me down. I started to take lots of stress naps to deal with the anxiety of it all. After yet more invites to hang out with Toby not so subtly suggested to me throughout the day, I went to bed and crashed. I woke up sometime in the night feeling a sharp pain in my groin. At first I thought it was a need to pee, but the pain got worse, as if I were literally having something stabbed against my crotch to the point of bleeding. My eyes struggled to open, and my body felt incredibly heavy, even as I tried to sit up. I couldn't move much. Something was weighing down my arms and chest. My eyes adjusted to the near pitch dark of the room to make out the faces of Mum, Dad, and Lee looming over me. Mum and Dad were on either side of my bed and were pinning me down. Even Mum's strength was enough to pin my left arm down onto the bed. Dad had one hand pressing down on my chest, and the other gripping my right forearm so tightly the skin felt like it was burning from the friction. Lee was the one pressing something against my groin. The pain made me want to thrash wildly about. Every alarm bell was going off in my mind that if she pressed even just a little bit harder, irreversible damage would be done to my crotch. Worse than them holding me down, worse than whatever sharp metallic object was being pushed deeper into my crotch, was the looks on the faces of my family. Their faces, though hard to make out in the dark, weren't the faces of maniacs or emotionless serial killers. No, their faces were twisted with anguish, almost as if they didn't want to be doing this to me, as if each of them wanted to scream into my face how sorry they were. "You're making us do this," Mum whispered into my ear. Her voice was trembling. "The next time we invite you to spend time with Toby, you say yes," she said. "You will always say yes. Do you understand?" I understood, but I was trembling so hard it was as if I were dunked into ice-cold water. If I tremble any harder, it'll piece the skin, I thought, mad with fear. I could only imagine the look on my face, like some barn animal that knows it's about to be slaughtered, but too dumb to comprehend why and how. Hot tears streamed down my cheeks and made the room harder to see. I blinked as hard as I could to clear up my vision. "Promise!" Mum yelled into my face. Hearing my mother shout into my face the way she did, with such barely controlled venom, was the worst sound I had ever heard in my life. "I promise," I said, saying the words as if each syllable were foreign to me. I could hardly speak from the fear gripping me. "Please, please, don't hurt me," I said as loud as I dared. "This is your only warning," said Dad. "You're making us do this. Everything will be fine so long as you are nice to Toby and all of us. Now we're going to let you go, and you're going to lay still and not move an inch until the sun comes up. Is that understood?" "Yes," I choked out. For a horrible second, I felt warmth at my crotch. She's pierced it, I thought. A moment later, however, I realized I had wet myself in fear, hot pee soaking into the mattress. Lee pulled her hand away, and whatever it was she was holding. The horrible stabbing pain stopped, but the residual ache of having something sharp having been pressed there remained. Like shadows, each member of my family melted into the darkness. They left the bedroom door open. I sobbed in the dark and didn't move except for the trembling, which I couldn't stop. Bit by bit, the sun rose and a hard orange glow filled my bedroom, which stank of urine. It had laid trembling in bed for around 3 hours before the sun came up. I eventually found the will to get out of bed. I grabbed a change of clothes and took a shower and then put the urine-drenched clothes into the hamper. I felt emotionally and physically exhausted and burnt out from the fear of what had happened. I could hear them talking downstairs as if all was fine with the world, the smell of bacon and eggs rising up to the first floor of the house. I was starving. I made my way downstairs and saw Mum, Dad, and Lee sat eating breakfast. "Morning," said Mum. "I heard you get up, so I made you a cup of tea." She slid the freshly brewed cup of tea over to me, and I sat down at the dinner table. The others ate and made small talk whilst I stared at the cup of tea as if it were some alien object. My hand continued to tremble as I gripped the handle and brought the cup to my lips and drank. My parched throat enjoyed the taste of the tea immensely. "So, Dad," said Lee casually, "I was wondering if Toby could come over today." It was almost comical how much tea I spilt on my lap when Lee spoke up. My lap burned from the scalding tea. "Oh dear," said Mom, and she fretted about dabbing a cloth on my lap to handle the worst of the mess. I barely even registered the pain of the tea because I was fixated on what Dad was going to say to Lee. "Should be fine," said Dad, and he pretended a novel idea just occurred to him. "You know," he said, pinching a slice of toast from his plate and biting into it, "I think Mike and Toby should hang out today too. What do you think?" "Sure," said Lee. "I think Toby would like that." None of them made any particular look towards me, but I could tell they were waiting on my response. Of course they were. I hadn't dreamed they were threatening me 3 hours ago, had I? Had I? They acted so casually, nibbling at their breakfast despite everything that had happened. A part of me still doubted myself. "Sure," I choked out. "Good man," said Dad, slapping me on the back. "Great," said Lee cheerfully. She started typing on her phone. "I'll let Toby know." I heard a clunk near me on the table. Mom had just put down a fork I hadn't seen her holding before. She smelled of orange juice and biscuits. I could still feel the pain in my groin from where something sharp had been held almost to the point of piercing the skin. There had been blood, which I had cleaned up with a flannel and several sheets of toilet roll tissue. The pain in my groin served as a constant reminder that morning that I wasn't safe, and wouldn't be until I could figure out what Toby had done to my family. I hadn't touched any of the breakfast Mom had made beyond nibbling the crust off a slice of toast. Dad had excused himself and had gone upstairs. He said he was going to leave shortly to run errands. Lee was sitting at the dinner table looking down at her phone, seemingly not paying me any attention. Mom had picked up the fork she had set down beside me before and had taken it back to the kitchen. I already had a fork set for me, and I had realized after the fact that she likely would have held the fork to my throat, and worse, had I not agreed to hang out with Toby when Dad had brought up the idea. I wanted nothing more than to go back to bed, but the memory of my family surrounding my bed, pinning me down, and threatening my life was a worse lingering pain than the one in my groin. Whilst I sat at the dinner table, Lee's phone pinged numerous times. I had been so lost in my own reverie I hadn't heard the first half-dozen pings, but there were enough to bring me out of my thoughts. "What is it?" I said. Lee groaned. "Nothing," she said. "Drop it." Before I could say anything more, the doorbell rang. Lee lifted her gaze from her phone to me. "It's probably Toby," she said. For a moment, I wondered if I was really going to get up and go answer the door. The idea of seeing Toby after last night made me want to vomit. There was still a part of me that was willing to put up a fight with Lee, Mom, and Dad, even after how they had threatened me. But it was a mad, insignificant, defiant part of me that was all idea and no action. I was afraid, confused, and sleep-deprived. There was simply too much bearing down on me to even consider going against my family's demands. Toby's arrival was uneventful and passed by like a half-remembered dream. I was so delirious with everything I had numbly greeted Toby at the door, spoke with him briefly about the weather. It was an unusually hot day. And then we ventured upstairs to my bedroom. I felt as if I were a video game character being viewed from the third person, able to move my body but not really experiencing everything firsthand. There were brief instances where I had to make certain choices that couldn't be done on the delirious, dissociative autopilot mode I was stuck in and didn't want to leave. About 10 minutes after I met Toby at the front door and welcomed him inside, I found myself sitting in my computer chair watching War of Chaos's menu emerge on the screen. "Do you want to play?" I said, gesturing to the keyboard and mouse. "No thanks," said Toby, sitting slightly behind me on my right on a chair taken from Lee's room. He then added, "I prefer to watch." "I bet you do," I thought. I played the game for an hour, continuing the campaign I had started but hadn't played for over a year. I sighed and stretched, having found momentary bliss in forgetting the world and concentrating as best I could on the needs of my cosmic marines. Toby hadn't said a word the entire game. I looked over my left shoulder to the doorway. I flinched. Lee was standing at the doorway watching me with unblinking eyes. For a half-second, she remained motionless before she sprang to life, as if remembering to play the part of my sister. "Having fun?" she said, smiling, entering into my room and standing behind Toby's chair. "Yes," Toby mumbled. "Mike's playing as the Cosmic Marines. He's really good at the game." "Oh, cool," said Lee. "Can I watch too?" "Mike?" I realized I was clenching my fists hard enough to make my hands tremble. I opened my hands and groped for the right words to say. "Sure," I said, wishing the opposite but not daring to refuse what Lee asked. Lee's phone pinged again. She stuffed it into her jean pocket and left the room. I thought she might leave us be only for her to return with a chair that she placed beside Toby. She sat on it and looked beyond me to the computer screen, seemingly just as ready as Toby to watch me play the game. It was getting hotter in my bedroom, and the slight smell of urine was present in the room coming from my bed. Toby began to take off his hoodie, but Lee put her hand on his wrist. "What are you doing?" she said. Toby looked at her sheepishly. Taking off my hoodie," he mumbled. Lee just shook her head slightly in a no gesture. "But it's hot," said Toby. Lee shot a look my way, and I felt fear stab in my chest. I did my best to casually look away from her and to fix my attention back to the game, starting the next mission, pretending not to take much notice of Lee and Toby's disagreement. I heard the rustle of Toby's hoodie fabric and the creak of the plastic chair he was sitting in, and then a sudden hard slap. I said no, said Lee. "Now stop it." There was silence between them after that. 20 minutes passed of me playing the game and Toby and Lee watching. The next mission had only just gotten underway. I was fortifying my base well enough, but imagined the insectids were going to spring an attack soon enough. They were a parasitic race which was best to avoid all possible confrontation with, since to confront them meant risk of the parasite spreading through your troops. Destroying them all at once was really the only viable option to make it to the end game. They were more likely to attack first, since they had a constant need to feed. The clinking of glasses and the rattle of plates brought me out of the game. Mom was at the bedroom door with a tray loaded with food and drinks for us. Orange juice, biscuits, and tuna sandwiches. Toby and Lee accepted the drinks, both giving polite thank yous. I hesitated to take mine, but did so, setting my share next to my keyboard. "Watcha playing?" Mom asked. "War of Chaos," said Lee. "Mike's really good at it." "Really?" said Mom. "It looks fun. Mind if I watch?" There was a long moment of silence. Because nobody objected, Mom went away and returned with a chair from her bedroom and sat down beside Lee. I continued playing the game and noticed sweat dripping down my temple. The day had gotten much hotter, with bright beams of daylight streaming into the room. I wiped my brow, and as I did so, I looked behind me. Toby was red-faced, sweating profusely in his hoodie. Lee was wearing a simple top, so was handling the heat fine, and Mom had taken her cardigan off, so she wasn't too bothered by the heat either. They all drank their glasses of orange juice and, almost identically, dipped a biscuit into their glass, soaked it into the orange juice and ate it. Soon after, there was a sudden rustling of clothing. Toby had taken his hoodie off. Lee and Mum's eyes stared at him unblinkingly after he did this. Then, after a moment, Mum forced a smile and mumbled something about getting the clothes out of the wash, and left the room. Lee looked away from Toby as she thought about what he had just done. It became immediately clear to me as soon as Toby had taken off his hoodie why Lee might have been so against it. Toby had at least a dozen crisscross scars across both forearms. I pretended not to notice and went back to my game. Shortly after, Toby broke the silence. "I think I'm going to go home now," he said. "No, you're staying," said Lee. Toby stood up suddenly. "I can't do this," he said. "This isn't what I wanted." "I know it isn't," said Lee. "But now you have to live with what you've done. You don't have a choice." I wondered if throughout all this I was supposed to even be aware this conversation was happening. What scared me most was how they were now having this kind of conversation with me in the room, as if what I thought about any of it no longer mattered. "I'm going," said Toby, and he started off towards the bedroom doorway. "No," said Lee. And then I felt sharp edges against the topmost part of my left ear. "No, don't, please, no, stop," said Toby. I dare not look behind me, but I could just make out in the thin black plastic of my PC monitor the sight of Lee holding a steak knife to my left ear. "If you don't sit down right now, I swear I'll do it," said Lee. Toby started to whimper. I remained as still as I could manage, silently wishing for Toby to listen to Lee. "Please," said Toby, beginning to sob. "Please, I just want to go home." I felt the teeth of the knife dig into my ear, drawing blood. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I trembled, doing everything in my power not to move should Lee decide to carve into my ear with as much force as she could muster. Toby hurried over to the chair and sat down. "I don't want to do this," said Lee. "But you're making me do this. Behave. Are you going to behave?" "Yes," said Toby pitifully. "Good," said Lee. "But please," I said, choking the word out. "Why are you doing this?" Lee sighed but made no effort to remove the knife from my ear. "This is all Toby's fault," said Lee, "because of something he did to your sister. Now I'm stuck in this body, in this life that isn't mine." Who are you?" I said. "Oh, come on," said Lee. "You've already figured it out. You tell me." "Toby," I said. "You're Toby." "That's right," said Lee. "And I'm stuck in your sister's body because Toby found a way to copy his mind over into someone else. He thought by taking over my body he could get what he always wanted." You? I said. Lee stifled a mirthless laugh. No, she said. You. Lee sat herself forward more, leaning against me because, I could only imagine, the arm holding the knife was starting to get tired. Toby has been obsessed with you for years, even before you invited him to your birthday. He worships the ground you walk on. It's not like that, said Toby. I just wanted a friend. Lee kissed her teeth and ushered for me to turn around. She moved the knife from my ear to my neck. I watched her do it, thinking at any moment I might try and tear the knife from her grip. But the consequences of failing to take the knife from her was too much for me to risk. Not only hurting myself, but her too. What if my sister was inside there somewhere? What if she could still be saved? First, he took over your sister, said Lee. And then when you wouldn't leave things be, I took it upon myself to take over your mom and dad too. And I'll take over more until you both learn to do as you're told. What do you want from me? I said. Lee pushed the knife into my throat enough to make me tense up all over my body. I could see the madness in her eyes. All you need to do is behave, she said. Let me figure out the rest. If you tell anyone about this, if you try to reveal what's going on to anyone, we'll just take them over too. Lee turned to Toby. And you, she said. If you don't start listening to every word I say, I promise you Mike will be the one who suffers the consequences. Do you understand? Toby stared at Lee with wide eyes. Toby, said Lee. I said, do you understand? Lee dug the knife harder against my throat. I convulsed from the pain, making the cut even deeper. Warm blood leaked down my neck. I understand, said Toby, nodding profusely. Please, 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 I understand, he said. Good, said Lee. She pulled the knife back from my neck. You boys keep enjoying yourselves. I'm going to have a little word with Mum. And with that, Lee walked out of the room, leaving Toby and I alone. I grabbed a nearby sock from the floor and pressed it to the cut on my neck. I'm sorry, said Toby, his face a wet, shiny mess, his eyes puffy as if he were stung by a bee near each eye. How did you do it? I said. I didn't care to give him any sympathy. I just needed to know. Toby sniffled and wiped the tears from his eyes as he gathered his thoughts. He glanced to the empty doorway and then said in a whisper, Have you ever heard of astral projection? It's like your spirit leaving your body? I said. It's consciousness leaving the body, said Toby. I did it by accident. I tried to take my own life. I just wanted to end it. But I didn't take enough pills. I just fell into a deep sleep, and the next thing I knew, I was standing outside of my body. I thought maybe I had died, but I could see my body was still breathing in bed. I moved around my room, floating. It was cool. Toby looked away from me, his puffy eyes searching the carpet stained with droplets of my blood. It was late at night, and my consciousness, I don't know if you could call it a spirit or ghost, I don't know. I left my house, floated right through the wall, and then He started to sob into his hands some more. Just spit it out, I said. I knew the way to your house, said Toby. I went through the front door and I was just looking around. I didn't intend to do anything to anyone. I didn't even know that I could. The whole thing didn't even feel real at the time. I went up to your room and you weren't there. I was going to go home because I didn't think it would be a good idea to be away from my body for so long. And then, you know the rest. Tell me, I said. I want to hear you say it. I went into your sister's room, said Toby. I saw her sleeping, and then I got closer and closer, and then the next thing I know, I'm awake in my bed. I felt horrible, but I was okay. Besides, being too stupid to know how to kill myself properly, everything was normal. It was as if it was all a dream or something. I even made myself think that none of it had been real. But then, 2 days later, I got a call from your sister. She told me she wanted to meet up. I probably would have thought it was some prank, but it seemed like too much of a coincidence for her to call me out of the blue right after I astral projected. So I met up with her. And what? I said. You decided to start dating? No, said Toby. I mean, that's what we told people. We thought it was kind of fun at first, but... Toby leaned closer to me. She's crazy. They're unstable. I drove a punch so hard into Toby's face it was a wonder I didn't break my wrist. Toby hit the ground, blood gushing from his nose. I threw myself on top of Toby and started to strangle him. I wasn't thinking clearly, but I didn't care. I just needed all of it to stop. Maybe killing Toby was the way to make it stop. Toby thrashed in my grip, but I held his throat as tight as I could. Mom and Lee raced up the stairs, having heard the commotion, and charged into me to get me off of Toby. Toby breathed in a lungful of air as Lee and Mom wrestled me to the ground. For several seconds, I fought against them before I felt the now familiar sensation of a knife at my throat. "Stop!" Mom screamed into my face. "Stop it!" I stopped thrashing, going still. "Get him out of here," said Mom. Lee took hold of Toby and got him to his feet. She said something into his ear that I couldn't make out. They left the room. "What did he tell you?" said Mom. "Everything," I said, trying to catch my breath. "I know you're not my mom." "Good," said Mom. "I was getting sick of pretending anyway. If I take this knife from your throat, are you going to stay calm?" I considered the question, then nodded. Mom drew the knife away from my neck. There was blood on her hand and more blood on my shirt. "Stay here," said Mom. "I'll get you something for that cut." "Wait," I said. Mom, standing, waited for me to speak. "Why not just take me over too?" I said. "Because," said Mom, "then we wouldn't have anything to stop Toby from trying to kill himself. He doesn't care about his own life, but he does care about you. We don't know what will happen to us if he dies. Maybe you'll get your family back, or maybe we'll still be stuck in these bodies. Who knows? All I know is I don't want to die, even if I am just a copy." I didn't know what to say. Mom, or Toby in Mom's body, wiped a tear from her eye. "I'm sorry," she said, and walked out of my bedroom. In the wake of Toby, Lee, and Mom having left my room, I at last felt a reprieve, at the very least, from the confusion of what was happening to my family. Mom and Lee talked with Toby downstairs for 10 minutes before Lee left with Toby, to where I don't know. It's been 8 hours since they left the house. I've hidden myself away in my room trying to think about what my next move should be. I have to do something. But what?